This podcast includes explicit content. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to the Earth's podcast special, the Conservative Manifesto, where we, your favorite perverted podcasters, try our hand at being investigative journalists. The Earth's podcast. So we went on a trip to the London Porn Film Festival, and while we were there, gathered information to tell you all about the new censorship laws in the UK. An age purification barrier to stop the children from seeing all that shocking pornography on the surface. But behind that, a major privacy crisis and even the foundation of a Chinese-style censorship regime, the Great British Firewall. 78% of the British public were in favour of this new act. But how did it all come to be this way? Why is it so politically powerful to moralize about sex? What is so bad about pornography, and why are some kinds of sex okay and others are not? In this episode, we talk to pornographers, filmmakers, and we return to some of the people you met in the last episode to get to the heart of how pornography divides society. Porn will tear us apart again. Porn will tear us apart again.
Exactly. Kids are just 2 clicks away from watching extreme, brutalizing images, like double anal fisting online. Porn is degrading and objectifying women. Young boys are going to demand from girls what they are watched in porn. They will think anal sex is normal. They are going to watch simulated rape and think that means rape is okay. Porn is a lot like drugs. They will seek out more and more hardcore porn and will become completely desensitized to sex. Studies from the NSPCC have found that half of all children have watched porn online, including a quarter of 11-year-olds. It's stripping children of their childhoods.
This negative take on porn may surprise some of you, but probably not many. It's how a lot of people talk about porn, when they talk about porn. But some people are downright panicking about it. This is known as the porn panic, and it comes down to a lot more than good old sex. But I'm wondering, what porn are we really talking about here? It's true, not all porn is good porn. We can get a bit caught up in our alternative porn bubble and forget that there is actually negative content online too, right? But why do people have this blanket idea about porn that it's all bad? And along with that comes the assumption that people that are in the sex industry don't want to be, that if they had the choice, they wouldn't be. In fact, perceptions of the sex industry revolve around a lack of choice. More on that in this podcast. But for now, we caught up with Vex Ashley from 4 Chambers at the London Porn Festival, who tells us a bit about her choice to be part of the industry and what porn means to her. If you've only ever used Pornhub, her answer might surprise you, might excite you.
Hi, my name is Vex Ashley. I am an independent porn performer, producer, director. Sometimes I perform on webcam, so like a general internet naked person. I think for me, like the thing that really excited me about making porn was the fact that I wasn't really seeing the potential of porn as a creative medium kind of really being explored. So for me, I came from a background in kind of making fine art installations, and I was really interested to see if we could put the same kind of focus on aesthetics and concepts into pornography as I was doing with my artwork. And it was just really an experiment initially because I was kind of camming, and we decided just to do it as a little bit of a passion project. And we were making these kind of weird experimental short films with sex and putting them on the internet. And the response was really incredible, kind of more than we had imagined. And we really felt like that there was a kind of gap in the canon that was sort of, I'm going to use the phrase, aching to be filled. And yeah, that kind of started like that. And I ended up kind of becoming successful to the point where it's kind of now my full-time job, which is incredible.
So most of the countries define pornography as work that was produced solely or principally for the purposes of sexual arousal. We asked pornographer and activist Pandora Blake to give us a definition of pornography in the UK.
So the definition of pornographic is that it would be classified, if it would be classified as R18, which is the highest classification, then it's pornographic. And if it would be classified as 18 and it was primarily produced for purposes of sexual arousal, then it's pornographic.
So, but then this classification system is in place to let us know that this content is not for everybody. And that's quite interesting because the R18 definition actually comes from the British obscenity laws from 1959, which establish that a publication would be deemed obscene, depending on, and I quote here, whether the tendency of the letter published is to deprave and corrupt those whose minds are open to such immoral influence, and into whose hands the publication might fall. So that could be children or...
God, like in English society, the rich people are more adult and they more deserve like to have access to adult stuff. It's just like being back in like the Victorian era.
So basically, today, the definition of porn relies on what used to be defined as pornographic, as in erotic literature. We also heard an interesting example from journalist Damien Gale.
There's one famous case regarding Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence, which is quite an explicit book. I mean, I haven't read the whole thing, but I've read extracts of it. And the barrister in that case, the prosecution barrister, as he was making his case, he said, it's not the kind of thing that you would want your wife or servants to read.
Okay, so we all know that the Victorians were prudish, but are we still seriously living by their classist and sexist morals? Since we're all Berliners and intentional journalists, we decided to find out about Germany's laws on porn. Are they also Victorian prudes? We spoke to someone who works for Beate UZTV. Remember when we watched porn on TV? These guys are the biggest provider for private channels such as Sky. We talked to Andreas Fischer, CEO from the company, and Manfred Rauch, who has a quite interesting job. He makes sure all softcore content is actually soft.
Yeah, my job is called Jugendschutzbeauftragter in German. I have to take care that, or I'm responsible that all broadcast, all content we send is legal content. Like we're not allowed to show pornography or any pornographic content, so I have to take care that all the versions we send do not meet German criteria for pornography.
So wait, what is the criteria of pornography?
The criteria of pornography, those five, they haven't changed since 1969, since 1970. And they were actually decided upon a book called Fanny Hill. And so they tried to adopt it on the movies and later on TV as well. So.
Wait, on Fanny Hill? The book
Fanny Hill, yeah. Early 18th century British novel.
Wait, why?
Because it went to court and then they had to make a decision what is pornography and what not.
So the court's opinions on Fanny Hill during the 18th century shape our decisions on what is or isn't porn today. To help us understand what this means in practical terms, Andreas and Manfred kindly sent us the guidelines for how to avoid creating pornographic content, something we've aspired to never.
The definition of pornography in Germany. People must not be substituted easily as objects of lust. That is, if you have one sex scene followed by the next with the same person, it suggests clearly that if he or she is finished with one, he or she is off to the next. This is not acceptable. All people involved in the plot need some sort of relationship. They need to be introduced and must be connected among each other. At least there must always be some reason or motivation for them having sex.
Okay, so to avoid something being solely or principally for the purposes of sexual arousal, you have to add in a monogamous relationship and only have the kind of sex that doesn't feel like the ultimate goal in life. It's ridiculous. I mean, I feel like, there were good intentions behind like putting up this criteria, like trying to protect women from like the depraved sexuality of men. But actually, it's just basically reinforcing the idea of like the passive sexuality of women. You know what I mean?
It sounds like the laws of God are applied into this, like a relationship and like a female like chastity.
I feel like I don't totally get what you guys mean by the like female thing in this. For me, this is saying like he or she, any kind of continuing on to the next one, any kind of outside of relationship sex.
Well, but actually what Manfred and Andreas explained to me is that, for example, if you have a threesome and it's 2 women and 1 man, that is fine. But if you have 2 men and 1 woman, that is not okay, because then the woman is being portrayed as an object of lust. So a woman in a sexual situation automatically is defined as an object of lust, and that is not okay.
Like it's not her choice. Like it's just like
exactly, yeah. But in the contrary case, that is okay, because men are fine, I guess, with being portrayed as objects of lust, or they're not even considered objects of lust.
It says that this means that agency it's banned.
Absolutely.
I want to cry.
But in all seriousness, though, if film is art, and art is meant to hold up a mirror to life, then cutting relationships or sex that don't subscribe to these rules from films, if we don't want the film to be classed as pornography, is also just a way of saying some of our lifestyles or sexualities count and others don't. Some of those other lifestyles for the UK simply include female sexuality and pleasure. So, for example, the 2014 regulation, the Audiovisual Media Services Regulations law, aka the face-sitting ban, has decided that distinctly female, distinctly queer sex wasn't only not okay to put in porn, but illegal. The obscenity lawyer Miles Jackman explained.
And there were a number of activities which they identified as being unacceptable and therefore considered to be illegal, i.e. you could not broadcast it. And those included squirting, face-sitting. And it was very interesting that most of the activities which were considered unacceptable related to female pleasure.
The list of things banned from UK porn: spanking, caning, aggressive whipping, penetration by any object associated with violence, physical or verbal abuse, consensual or not, urolania, toilet-related sex, role-playing as non-adults, physical restraint, humiliation, female ejaculation, strangulation, face-sitting, fisting.
Oh my god, that sounds horrible, doesn't it, ladies?
Oh god.
Wait, I don't get it. What are you supposed to do?
I'm a little bit turned on, actually. To be honest. I can't do it. Ooh, I want it even more.
It's so weird that we're still in this place. Like, female pleasure. Oh no, women are going out of their way for pleasure. Quick, burn them. It's like...
It means that we're not ironing, ladies.
We will make them want to divorce or bury husbands, or what's the point of this?
That's true.
Divorce, reason, face-sitting.
By having a fist inside your body when you can have a baby. Like, what's this?
Okay, so let's summarize, okay? There is soft porn, there's hardcore porn, and then there's so-called extreme porn, which is banned, right?
So extreme pornography, basically, is like 5 different types. So again, it doesn't matter if it's consensual. It has to be an explicit and realistic depiction of either rape or simulated rape, necrophilia, bestiality, threat to a person's life, or serious injury to the anus, breasts, or genitals. So like fisting, I think, is fine. The police guidance says don't bother arresting people for fisting. Like, it's really hard to prove in court that it would cause serious damage. They've had people in court before being like, no, fisting is fine. But like, if you're doing like knife play or like hook suspension or, I don't know, like really hardcore BDSM that could cause damage, then that's not okay. And any like rape fantasy or like sleepy sex or erotic hypnosis, that's not okay. So it's still problematic because that still covers consensual fun, kink.
Well, I mean, it does seem reasonable to have some limits to what can be shown when some acts, like, say, bestiality, are illegal. But why ban sexual practices that are perfectly legal off-camera?
Things that are legal to do, like fisting and water sports, but they are illegal to represent. So the moment that you put a camera in front of people performing these activities, you are essentially turning something legal into something illegal, which makes no sense philosophically whatsoever.
Okay, so we put these laws in place to protect the children. Therefore, owning nude pictures of minors is illegal. But, curiously, we could also be criminalizing them, meaning if a 16-year-old takes a nude selfie, then they are creating child pornography.
Now, there is a very strong argument that this is unfair. The simple principle of law is that a law should be clear and comprehensible enough that a citizen can moderate their behaviour in order to be lawful. In other words, you should be able to know that murder's wrong and therefore not do it. And likewise, you should be able to know that you are or not able to take selfies at a certain age. And the fact that the vast majority of people don't seems to me that the law, unfortunately, is out of step with social values, particularly technology, and the interaction between the two around younger people. And then again, we also have adults, parental age, being worried about these things, not really understanding the consequences, not discussing it openly. So the usual thorny thing that parents are uncomfortable having that conversation with their children, and therefore passing the buck to the state, and that's why we have age of verification.
There seems to be a real problem with talking about and representing sex in general. A whole lot of shame surrounds sex in the public eye, though it's something most of us do quite happily in private. If only there was somewhere for us to put all that shame.
Who could be the perfect scapegoat? How about sex workers?
Yes, let's put the blame on sex workers.
Yes. When we talked to Jerry Burnett, the author of Porn Panic, in the last episode, we talked about the tabloid press using headlines like, "We found hardcore porn on the murderer's computer," and stuff like that. Or the recent case in the south of Spain where a sex worker got raped, and then the rapists weren't condemned as such because if she's a sex worker, she just cannot get raped. She was kind of looking for it, or that's her job, right? And then, for example, there's the scandal with Donald Trump and Stormy Daniels. The sex industry gives us an explanation for moral transgressions, be it crime or infidelity. Because, why would people not believe President Trump's always truthful words against those of a porn star, right? Surely it was all her fault. Yeah, right. Pornographer Holly Randall recently interviewed Stormy Daniels on her podcast. She said the press always made a point of calling her porn star Stormy Daniels and going on to flesh out her story with often fake details like, "Ew, her nails were pink and sparkling, gross." So we asked Holly, why does the media talk about sex workers in that derogatory way?
Yeah, I just wonder what kind of role you think the media plays in perpetuating like a certain view of the sex industry.
Well, I mean, the media is going to perpetuate what sells, right? And the two things that sell are fear and sex, right? So if somebody is involved in the sex industry, I mean, saying porn star Stormy Daniels, that's such a salacious, little tidbit right there. I mean, just, it's so juicy, porn star. How often does Anderson Cooper get to say porn star? So it's just what sells, I mean, people can't believe that there's this porn star wrapped up, with our president. So, the media just sensationalizes the porn industry. Like, they sensationalize everything.
So yeah, sex sells. But while anti-porn feminists often criticize porn for objectifying women, isn't that what the media is actually doing? Social media networks often police and censor the accounts of sex workers. Like, to them, it's okay to decide to ban people's voices and expressions, like to simply make them invisible.
Have you had your social media accounts ever deleted, or are you worried that might happen?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I have. I had my Snapchat deleted. I had like 40,000 followers. Yeah. But, and that's the thing too, is that like the whole social media thing has kind of been like a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's allowed girls to have a direct connection to their fans and to be able to, create their own audience and promote their product and sell stuff themselves and, be entrepreneurs. So it's interesting. I was talking to Abigail Mack, I think, about this on my podcast, and she was like, it's kind of unfair how she said that she follows Sports Illustrated, and she was saying that, these photos of these completely naked girls, and, she puts up a picture where she's got a little bit of cleavage and it gets taken down, and she's like, it just seems unfair that, this today in our culture, we're trying to say, you should express yourself and be proud of your body and, celebrate the female body unless you're a porn star, and then it's disgraceful. And I was like, that's kind of interesting because, you see these girls who maybe don't normally model nude, and they do some nude layout, and it's like, she's so brave to bear all in this nude layout, but it's like, you're a porn star, and if you nude for a living, then it's like, disgusting. It's not brave at all.
Hold up. So now we're not even talking about government censoring us, but we're also talking about unelected private corporations with white men at the top of them, just making those decisions by themselves.
Kind of sounds like those corporations are the ones that need some more parenting.
So it's not only about porn and films, it's all about all kinds of artistic expressions that deal with sexuality. Filmmaker and writer Charlie Forrest was giving us an example.
But aside from that, even if we didn't have these laws coming in, there's another very, very big issue that I don't think gets enough attention. And that's the hostility of platforms to adult content. So, for example, I publish short stories on Amazon, and Amazon may or may not choose to flag some of those as being sort of bad. In the worst case, what it can do is it can ban stuff. It hasn't banned any of mine, but a couple of my stories, it has kind of flagged it as adult. And what that means then is that it's much harder for users to find it. It doesn't come up in normal search listings. You've got to dig deep to find it. It won't come up in recommended lists and things like that.
So properly shadow banned?
Yeah, effectively it's very similar to shadow banning, but has a huge impact on what is more commercially viable. So, so if you write, say, kind of a bit of a short story about a lactation fetish, then, there's a very good chance that that's going to get adult blocked and be very, very difficult to find. Whereas, kind of your more tedious billionaire 50 Shades of Grey bullshit is going to not be. So what that means then is that then we have this situation where we have companies acting as unofficial, unelected, unaccountable censors, which is a big issue because this is fucking around with people's livelihoods. This is fucking around with people trying to make a living.
Ever heard of Airbnb, Uber, Indiegogo, or Google? All these companies also discriminate on sex workers for the mere fact of working in the industry. There are actually over 150 companies in all sorts of sectors. They discriminate on sex workers just for the mere fact of belonging to the industry. For example, if you want to rent an Airbnb for your holidays and they suddenly discover you're a sex worker, you're just banned from them. If you are a sex worker but you want to also work on other areas, if LinkedIn finds out that you were a sex worker, you are just banned from the social network, as if sex work wasn't work.
Exactly. It comes all down to that, not acknowledging that sex work is work.
Any government that allows the decriminalization of pimping and sex buying sends a message to its citizens that women are vessels for male sexual consumption. If prostitution is work, will states create training programs for girls to perform the best oral sex for sex buyers? Instead of including prostitution as so-called option in its immigration policies, New Zealand should investigate the harms, including sexual violence, that women in prostitution endure. If prostitution is sex work, then by its own logic, rape is merely theft. The inside of a woman's body should never be viewed as a workplace.
That was Julie Bindel, it was Liliana reading out a quote by Julie Bindel from an article of The Guardian. That is just one example of the arguments that many feminist abolitionists use in order to fight, in their own words, to fight against sex trafficking. But actually, the ultimate goal is to ban sex work completely. And this whole lobby has as a consequence that sex workers all over the world are being targeted. So say, for example, the recent law change in Germany regarding sex work forces all sex workers to register themselves on a huge database and carry on an identity card as sex workers.
So you are like basically officially discriminate because you have what they call here the Hurenpass, and now you can just show Airbnb that you are an official sex worker. So then you can be like officially banned from the platform. On last April 11 of 2018, 2 laws were passed. They are called SESTA and FOSTA. SESTA stands for the Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act, and FOSTA stands for Allow States and Victims to Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act. SESTA was actually voted 97-2 by senators who I think most likely than not have employed sex workers themselves. Okay, so these laws call themselves a strong stance against exploitation and sex trafficking. SESTA and FOSTA, what they do is that they make it possible for websites and digital platforms to be held legally accountable for sex work-related content posted to their services. So, SESTA and FOSTA, by holding accountable web platforms for this potential trafficking, they're pretty much creating a panic among the platform owners. Like, for example, even before this law was signed, many platforms started changing their terms of service preemptively and have made the regulations, even regarding explicit sexual material, even more strict. So shortly after FOSTA became official, some notorious escort advertising pages like Backpage.com, widely used by sex workers, was seized by authorities and shut down. The FBI was in there and so on, and the platform now it's closed. The problem here, we're all against trafficking, but the problem here is that by putting these kind of laws that make the lines between sex work and trafficking quite blurry and conflate both activities into one thing, is that they go further into stigmatizing sex work, and also they go further into making a profession such as sex work that it's already kind of unsafe and stigmatized even more, pushing it more into invisibility.
Yes, it does seem like a concerted attack on sex workers, and yet again we're in this awkward position that even in places where it is legal to be a sex worker, the methods by which sex workers can protect themselves to perform their role, duty, tasks and employment in the safest fashion possible is denied to them. So it is not uncommon to hear people say, oh, well, that person deserved this thing to happen to them because they were a sex worker, which would be socially intolerable to say if that person were a fire officer or a teacher. It's literally the hypocrisy that somehow sexuality is special and different to everything else. And as a consequence of that, we must therefore curb any transactional nature of sexual interaction. So yes, FOSTA and SESTA are very, very worrying because they are not dissimilar in their attack on the sexual community as, say, age verification in this country. I suspect that although it has taken our sort of authorities nearly 20 years to work out that there's sex on the internet, they're really going hell for leather to try and regulate it now. The problem with trafficking with regards to sex work is much as I understand it, that the definition of what trafficking is simply does not stand up to the normal notions of migration and movement of peoples. So if a Polish performer, as a member of an EU state, which is an ascension country, wishes to move to this country to work in porn in the UK, they are legally entitled to do so, free movement of people and so on. Should they be considered to be trafficked if they have themselves decided to leave their country of origin for another EU state? Of course not. You would literally not use that same argument for a Polish builder. You wouldn't say, well, I'm sorry, I'm not having my roof fixed today because you were clearly trafficked here under your own steam. It's a ridiculous contradiction. But it seems to be playing out in a sort of broader societal conception from popular films like Taken, where this notion of sex trafficking, now let's not be naive, sex trafficking does exist because people are trafficked for various reasons, or as we would call it, facilitated at law, but we're talking a minor percentage, not some ridiculous misreading like 80% of sex workers in this country are trafficked. I was watching BBC News about, I think it was Rotherham scandal, but they used the phrase sex workers were trafficked from house to house. That's not trafficking, mate. That's going from one place to another. Literally, you're not crossing a border to go from Dave's house to Fred's house. So, again, the idea that trafficking exists is like a meme that the media are very happy to rely upon as a way of deprecating sex workers' rights.
What is illegal offline is illegal online.
As Theresa May says, the goal is to put borders up online, to make accessibility online as difficult as it is on the high street. And as we've seen from Brexit, the UK is keen to assert those offline borders too. But could all this anti-sex work talk really be related to border control? Our friend Dion De Rossi, who was our guest camera on episode 4, told us about their own experience being held at customs when trying to enter the UK, and being deported back to Germany just on the suspicion of planning to work illegally. From their experience, we learned that migration officers are very keen to label people as trafficked.
And this is one of the big things, is that now the immigration, they can deport people on suspicion. They don't need any proof whatsoever.
It's terrifying.
It's largely up to the individual. And then when we look at the kind of people who are most likely to be targeted for sex work, we're talking about people of color, we're talking about trans people, working class people. The kind of people that are classically used as scapegoats for all sorts of societal ills when it comes to closing borders and having harsher views on migration. Sex workers are an easy target because we don't have unions, we don't really have the same legal rights. The stigma is huge, and if you look at, so in the detention centre, there are anti-human trafficking posters everywhere, all through the airport, all through the detention centre. That's the first thing you're asked, are you being trafficked? And it's because it's something, I mean, trafficking is just like the best thing that's ever happened to conservative governments.
Exactly.
Because it allows them to get rid of migrants, it allows them to get rid of working class people, it allows them to get rid of sex workers. Like, all of these visibly different and visibly non-normative people can be completely rounded up in one go and cast out of the country. So
under this veil of human trafficking, that we're protecting people.
It's like a conservative politician's wet dream. Like...
out of sight, it's out of mind.
Yeah.
If you're out of the country, we don't care.
Yeah, it's the same thing Germany's doing with the whole card at the moment. Like, this is all about classifying people, criminalizing them, and just washing your hands, saying they're another country's problem now.
Detention centres are really terrifying in between places where it seems to be okay to just forget about human rights, to question people in very oppressive leading ways, to put them in terrible conditions, and then lead them to say something that would allow you to deport them. This is just a blatant violation of human rights.
they do, like, they don't let you tell anyone where you are. They don't let you contact anyone, ask for help. They don't tell you that you don't have to answer any of the questions they ask you. They don't tell you that you don't have to show them the information they're asking for. So they told me, for example, that I had to show them my emails. And no, I mean, this is one of the things that I'm very fortunate for, as a very privileged person who has come from a background of, like, being around people that are more educated around the law and educated around knowing their rights. I could just say to them, no, actually, you're really wrong. You don't know how to do your own job. I mean, definitely these kind of tactics, they are used in this way. For example, in detention centres, there's no windows, there's no clocks.
Yeah.
They don't ever turn the lights off. You're in a group cell. It's fishbowl, so they are staring at you the whole time. If you want to go to the toilet, it's supervised. And there's nowhere to sleep. You just have to lie down and put your jacket over your head on the concrete. Like, there's nothing else to do. So all of this is designed to, like, disorient you before you're brought in for questioning, which is then not recorded.
Wow.
So like, they could write down anything in an unrecorded interview. Like, immigration can say anything they want, really. Like, there's no consequences for them.
Wait, were we talking about Guantanamo? Or or this is just like...
They really know how to make people feel very vulnerable, this whole situation here.
It's just crazy the way the court system treats supposed, like, migrants, but also apparently sex workers, whatever excuse they can have to call someone a migrant. Like, in America... This is kind of related, I'm going in America, you don't even have to be represented, like, legally by a lawyer if you're too poor to afford that sort of support in court. So then they have, like, migrants at, like, 8 years old defending themselves. So the thing is, like, these people in these situations, they have no real choices or rights or anything. And the governments can just decide, we don't want these kinds of people in our country anymore. Let's ultimately, I think you're right to say Guantanamo, because it's ultimately, let's torture them.
Yeah. In this case, I mean, what Dio told us, according to what they told us, the UK authorities could never actually prove that they are an actual sex worker. So all of this that happened to Dion was only on the sole suspicion of being a sex worker. Imagine if they went through their emails, imagine if they actually found real evidence for being labeled a sex worker. What could have happened to her?
So there's an attack on sex workers.
So what options do we have left, given this dreadful panorama?
The ideology behind this attack is the same. To fear sex, to control people's sexuality, to control people.
Well, we went to the London Porn Film Festival. We went to see Latin American post-porn, which included a lot of anti-abortion films.
Pissing on national heroes porn.
A lot of genocide porn.
Yeah.
Face-sitting in the woods.
BDSM, lesbian, queer, subversive spanking porn.
We even saw a lot of porn with political messages.
What else? There were even like animated films on masturbation and pussies that were like kind of like became like monsters in themselves and then ate all the predatory dudes. I love that kind of justice.
Oh my god, guys, it was so much fun, wasn't it? So we went also and talked to the organizers of the festival and asked them about their vision on pornography and why they decided to put this all together.
Hi, I'm Max Disgrace and I'm one of the London Porn Film Festival's programmers of 2018 and I'm also a filmmaker and outside of this I also curate like porn screenings as well. I think, for example, like through the festival, we're almost trying to build our own like idea of like how we would like to see porn and the porn we would like to see in the world. So for us, the definition is more on ethical terms and feminist and queer terms. Like we even had like animations where it's like a character was masturbating and scenes like this where it may not be something that would end up on a mainstream porn site, but that's kind of exactly where we're going with the festival. I think porn is just like a really interesting arena to discuss topics that are political in a way that will engage an audience, in fact, because it's filled with like pleasure and like really heartfelt statements, but also like talking about what we're fighting for. So I really love that because the mix is just a great combination to convey those ideas.
So isn't it so refreshing to have a complete different definition of what society and laws are telling us pornography is?
Yeah, I mean, a festival with such a profile feels pretty much like doing activism, like taking like a very like frontal and like a very clear stand against all these laws and all these regulations being put in practice.
I'm Rude Jude. I'm one of the programmers at London Porn Film Festival. This festival is about pornography, but it sits at an intersection, right? So when you stand there, you can see all other things, right? So you can look at race, you can look at class, you can look at how sexuality is controlled and dominated and I think distorted in many ways by the kind of dominant culture. And I understand critiques of mainstream pornography. I totally understand that, but I don't think that should lead to censorship. You know what I mean? I don't agree that censorship is the way to make things better. I believe that further exploration is the way to make things better, and by creating alternatives is the way to make things better. So for example, food, I mean, you can eat trash if you want to, you know what I mean? But no one's banning McDonald's, no one's banned KFC. There's a lot of like financial interests there, you know what I mean? And it's the same thing with the porn world as well. It's like there are financial interests which mean that certain kinds that are saleable, that are mainstream, you know, are kind of being perpetuated, but then the little people kind of trying to do stuff that's like alternative and a bit weird and like queer, we're the ones that are being targeted unfairly.
Could festivals like this change people's approach to sexuality?
I did receive some impressions from audience members just coming in saying that like they'd never seen anything like this before. They'd never sat in a room and watched porn with like other audience members, and they were just really happy and like just found that like a really hot experience, but also like just really, yeah, they'd never seen bodies like this on screen, like representing themselves or like just the range of different types of bodies and people in the films and how they were portrayed. Like one particular person was saying about there was a foursome scene with like Gisley in Bio Dildo 2 by Christian Slaughter, and they were like, wow, so there was still a cis male bodied person, and but it was like so queer and they were just like really like fascinated by this idea just because they'd never seen anything. So it's kind of like a naivety, but almost like we're welcoming that to the festival because we want people to experience it for themselves. So yeah, I think it works really well. I hope so.
So I agree. I think, going into this room and sharing the experience of watching porn together, watching inclusive porn that shows, this amazing range of sexualities and pleasure does change people's attitudes. It can relax them, and it definitely, like, it's a completely different experience than when you're like, I don't know, jerking off privately at home to you porn, right?
Yeah, totally. Because I think that festivals, like porn film festivals, like serve they're like about like this like celebratory nature. And I think they're one of like the few spaces in which you can meet people face to face and discuss issues of pornography face to face that go beyond the fact of jerking off and sexual arousal. They always offer, like, to me, like, festivals always offer the opportunity of discussing pornography, of discussing sexuality, of discussing the politics of sexuality in a deep and meaningful way. And I think there's like a very important factor when you do it personally, because it creates more engagement. It builds up like more like political consciousness, whether you are part of the industry or you're just like a spectator and someone who's just curious about what pornography is, or just curious about living the experience of watching porn in a cinema with a group of people.
Yes, because there are no spaces where you can just openly talk about sex in public. So that is unique and unprecedented.
Absolutely.
What's really interesting is how reflective these filmmakers are doing these kinds of film, because they explicitly address, well, all these political issues that we've been discussing in this podcast. I think a perfect example of that was the film First Period by Courtney Treble.
I find it entirely offensive and patriarchal that we aren't allowed to show how people of all genders achieve orgasm in a porn scene. By censoring fisting, the process in which a body with a cunt can come without a cock or cock-like object nearby is left a mystery. It strengthens the normativity of heterosexual penis and vagina sex and shames queers and cunt owners for wanting to feel open and full instead of tight and hungry. Taboo incest themes and the fetishization of young girls are among the most popular kinds of porn you can find online, laced with bold suggestions of non-consent, physical pain, and violence that is never questioned. While larger corporate distribution companies eagerly depict women as teens for profit, smaller indie porn companies face censorship and scrutiny from most credit card processors, even if that depiction of age play were clearly performance-based and consensual. What's shocking is the ways in which our government would allow a male-run corporate site to insinuate that a performer is having sex with her father, but not allow a self-publishing porn star to exploit her kinkier sides on film.
What legislators are doing is targeting queers, etc., and letting heteronormative, popular and degrading porn have free reign online. The problem with pornography, like with any other art expression, arises from it being dictated by normative rules that perpetuate the status quo regarding sexism and racism. It's not porn having a bad influence on society, it's society having a bad influence on porn. And this is what the laws are reinforcing when they ban the sexual depiction of varied pleasures like period sex, fisting, the face-sitting ban. Seriously though, face-sitting?
Inside the Green Mandate has face-sitting in it. It's great. I at no point felt like I was going to choke and die. Just, you know.
Yeah, it is.
I know it's only one data point, but I really feel it should be out there.
The London Porn Film Festival is an example of how inclusive of all bodies, genders, and all stories, and that's what feminism is all about. It's very saddening that a part of feminism misses this great potential in the porn for the sexual liberation of women. The argument that anti-porn feminists have constructed is being used by the right-wing bigots to keep the patriarchy in place. This is why we should carefully choose our words when talking about this matter, as words can be very powerful. Jerry Barnett gave us an example.
So objectification is one of the big ones, but objectification was a word that began in psychology, and it relates to the way that people... It relates to the way that we form, that we construct objects in our minds and so on. The anti-porn feminists picked up this word objectification and created this thing called sexual objectification. And the idea of sexual objectification is that by seeing a woman, that men's brains work in such a way that once you've seen a woman as a sexual object, which is what porn's about and lots of other media is about, then you kind of can't help seeing all women in that kind of way. So by seeing women presented as sex objects, then the male brain starts seeing all women as sex objects and nothing else. It doesn't seem to be an idea that's backed by psychology. It's an idea that it was a politically motivated idea.
Like opposed to those ideas of objectification and exploitation, what can porn do for women?
Well, I think, for a long time, people have had the idea that porn was a representation of women, being degraded and being subjected to the whims of, male pleasure and being there to serve male sexuality. But I think that now we're starting to see that women are coming into porn in a different way, where they're owning their sexuality and they're expressing it, and they're really changing things. There are women that are coming into the industry that are changing porn for women, and you're seeing a lot of really positive role models coming out that can show that you can be a woman and you can be sexual and you can be a porn star or a porn director or work in the adult industry and, you know, still have integrity and love what you do and be fully comfortable in your life choices and not be like a victim of, you know, this patriarchal society that's just trying to, you know, turn women into sex objects. So it's interesting to see like how like the perspective is starting to shift.
Given all the government is doing to shame pornography, it's worth remembering pornography has a sharp eye on governments, especially oppressive political regimes. The fact is, alternative porn is more inclusive than anything you'll watch on TV. It's a way of bringing everybody together to understand each other better than the life-affirming joy and connection of sex. Sadly, the new law is not going to do a lot to help minority and marginalized people or promote diverse sexuality. Quite the opposite, really.
I think when I say that this is a backlash, like what I see is that socially on the street, people are so much more accepting of gender and sexuality and sex. I think that in our media, like things are getting more and more open. The porn film festivals are showing more and more people getting stuck into making like amazing, queer, ethical, like material that is like showing different bodies and genders and relationships and kind of anti-patriarchal. And most of the kids you meet are just like, trans is no thing, you know, like gay is no thing. They don't care. They understand consent. And so like they know they're losing, right? Like the grassroots is against them. And so this like top-down authoritarian attempt to control us by law is this like last gasp, this attempt to like try and get us to go back in time because they know that it's not happening, that they are dinosaurs and in, you know, a few decades they're all going to die and we're just going to happily just fuck our way into the sunset and just not care. But in the meantime, like a lot of sex workers are going to be forced to work on the street and are going to die and like they do have power. It's not like we can just... Some people have the luxury of ignoring them and some people don't. And I think we all need to kind of rally around and be good allies and protect and support the kind of working rights of people in these criminalized industries to try and, you know, reduce the harms and keep as many people kind of alive as possible.
If you're still thinking the UK law change is about the children, which, in case you hadn't noticed, we don't, there must be something else we can do to protect them. But what could it be? Could we perhaps talk to our kids about pornography? When people talk about protecting children, the image that comes to mind is of a very young child coming across some compromising footage while they're looking for some Percy Pig videos. Of course, we don't want our 5-year-olds watching pornography. It would be very confusing for them at best. But young people are entitled to be curious about their sexuality. How did you guys feel during that time? Did you...
I read so many sealed sections in
it
Cosmo
was
magazine.
all about Cosmo magazine, and then those articles were always like, how to please your man.
In Australia, we have this magazine called Dolly, and they used to write about how to insert a tampon, which was very important.
I feel like I never fully understood things because it sort of gave me some basic answers, but then when you got into the nitty-gritty of it, I was still like, oh, I don't really understand.
Did you do the mirror check?
Yeah.
When you're in the bathroom and you grab the little handheld mirror or compact mirror and you look at your vagina and you're like, okay, so this is hole number 1, hole number 2, and hole number 3.
Like, I've had a good stare, but I feel like even now I'm not totally...
It was pretty, but like, I'll be honest, when you're 14 and you've never seen your vagina from that angle, it's pretty full on. It's pretty full on.
I didn't do it when I was 14. I did way later on with a group of sex workers, and it was like kind of like a performance thing, kind of like Annie Sprinkles, you know, looking at your uterus or cervix. That was
the first time.
That was the first time that I actually looked at it. Well, with the at the insides of it, really. Yeah.
Is there any teen men, like boy magazines? Because I feel like there's a lot for women. Like in Australia, there's a lot of
really though. Like it says it's for women, but it's kind of
okay. Because I was just thinking, like, oh, I wonder if there's like the male version.
No,
of
I mean,
Dolly.
I think that for young boys, they just need to like jump into being men. So I think they just like skip the teeny kind of magazines and they just jump straight into like this other like magazines like Maxim or Playboy.
So it's not
on.
porn that's fault, it's the society's fault for not providing this for like this medium, no?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as a teen, you just like really don't have like any resources to that. I think I learned that I remember very well at 13 being like super confused because I read on Cosmo that you shouldn't let your boyfriend watch you epilating your nipples. I was like, what? Pulling your hair off your nipples. I was like, what? Like, I was like just so confused.
Damn, I really wanted him to watch.
We have these teen magazines in Australia which tell you how to like when to say like no and yes about sex and consensual sex and stuff you could buy.
Oh really?
Do you not have that in the UK?
No, for us it was really like performance based, how to be good.
Or in Spain?
Absolutely not at all. It was all about how to kiss good, how to perform good overall sex, how to keep him in love, how to make him fall in love with you.
Like we had that, but then it also had like ask Dolly Doctor, and then Dolly Doctor would be like, oh, Dolly Doctor, I have these lumps after shaving, and then Dolly Doctor would be like, oh, you probably have a bikini thing, but always see a doctor. Here are how to like fix it. Here are some natural remedies. That's in Australia.
That's actually interesting, which is a country where sex work is legal.
Yeah, like also when I was a teen, like all these magazines about like exactly like some sort of like Dr. Hurt, whatever, when it came about like having sex, and so it was always about like the bottom line was like, don't forget, girl, if you want someone to respect you, try to remain virgin, you know. It was like all about like praising virginity and like pretty much like taboo about like topics such as abortion or like birth control, or so there was like just like no information that you can go to.
It was just
really bad.
Yeah,
don't get pregnant. Yeah. But then also that it was very like hetero as well. It was always the man and the woman. Absolutely. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, like without question. I think that probably is different for kids growing up now.
Yeah, I think it could be, since we have the internet now, right? So that means we should have access to way more information, better information, right? So there's plenty of stuff online designed to help us learn about sex, right? And, you know, get to ask the questions that we're probably too embarrassed to ask in real life.
Yeah, totally. Have you heard of Come Curious? They're like this YouTube duo. They put educational, sex-positive videos out there to give us like information for when you're just starting out with sex, or you have some awkward questions that you're too awkward to ask anybody, and you're just glad that like somebody is talking about it. It's like really the kind of content I wish I had access to when I was young, because they just talk so frankly and so sex-positively about everything. But I mean, they're getting censored too. It's not just porn that's being taken off of the internet. It's basically, it's almost like they're just searching keywords like YouTube with these platforms like sex, blah, 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 take it down. So these useful educational resources get lost with the censorship too.
We've had our own experiences with censorship when it comes to uploading our content on YouTube.
Yeah, YouTube really doesn't like our content, and in the recent couple of months, we've not been able to earn any single money from advertisers because of the content we give you guys.
Basically, if you have any words in your videos that are about sex, basically, cock, vagina, it makes them non-advertiser friendly. They've changed something in the algorithm recently on YouTube which puts us in the grey area, which means we're not wanted basically by anything that can make us money.
Yeah, we used to earn maybe like $30 or $40 a month, but now it's down to like $3 a month, and well, that's between us two. Even though that our YouTube channel is mainly about sex education, because we use vulgar language, so swear words as well as cock and pussy, then we are considered unacceptable by YouTube advertisers, which is pretty bullshit. Bullshit!
They have removed our videos before, and a lot of our thumbnails.
Many of our thumbnails, oh my god, so many of them, even nipple covered ones. Like,
yeah, they're not even bad.
Yeah.
Like, we had our rimming tips video removed the other day because it was like the side
of your bum. On the nipple video, even though we had already previously censored a nipple video thumbnail where it was me just about to go and lick Florence's nipple, it was censored, that got removed, and then I put a male nipple sticker over it with a box saying this is a male nipple, that got removed, so then I put an even bigger box over it with the YouTube failed sign, and hopefully that hasn't been removed, but we'll see.
But, I mean, Come Curious aren't the only people putting sex education online. Lena, you've got a sex school thing on the go, haven't you? Sex school, is that what it's called?
So yeah, in line with all these internet-based platforms on sex education, I am part of another internet effort called Sex School, which is basically about sex workers and coaches coming together to talk about sex and sexuality. And what's so special about our platform is that what we do, it's actually explicit sex education, in which we cover a specific topic about sex and we go around it in all its different aspects. For example, we have an episode on threesomes. We first sit and discuss questions of sexual health, the importance of communication, the importance of what to do when you get awkward feelings about a specific sexual act. And what we do on top of that is that we reenact those sexual acts. And the purpose with that is that, for example, many of the issues that we have surrounding a specific sexual act happen perhaps in the bedroom, when you're already naked or whatever, and then you need to discuss your boundaries, or when you need to talk about consent, or when you need to talk about your sexual preferences, whatever, and then it gets difficult to do. Hasn't it happened to you that suddenly you feel oh my god, can we change position? And then you just don't know how to ask for it.
So do you demonstrate that when you're doing this explicit demonstration? Are you hey, wait, hold on?
Absolutely.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we talk all about that. So it's the sexual explicit content that we do, unlike pornography, which is supposed to serve a fantasy purpose. Here we don't do that with such a pornographic goal, but more real sex life. So for example, we normalize the fact that sometimes you just need a pause. For example, we normalize the fact that sometimes you feel jealous under certain circumstances. We normalize the fact that sometimes communication can be awkward, but you can actually restore it and reach some agreement. Or we also normalize the fact that saying no, it's okay.
That sounds amazing.
To delve really deeply into it. It's also good that it's images, you actually get to see the stuff that you're being instructed on, because actually at that point it's not enough to read about it, because you have no idea, so you're just imagining. You don't really understand what's being talked about until you're in that situation.
Yes, absolutely. Well, right now we're just starting to film the episodes, and we are going to right now. We are struggling really hard on setting our platform because due to the fact that what we do implies non-pornographic yet sexually explicit content. What we do is just downright conflated with pornographic imagery. And given all these new regulations and changes in terms of service on many different web platforms, we face difficulties on being censored and banned any other time. For example, even super simple things on Facebook, for example, we cannot put our name Sex School. We had to change on the Facebook address. We cannot put the word sex as such. They just won't let us. Just sex. Or if we want to promote our content, everything that we have under, it's non-explicit, everyone sitting on a desk with full clothes on and stuff, we just cannot promote our content. We have to be in the shadows.
Right, so it really seems like platforms, and I mean with what we've been talking about with this podcast, the government platforms are not really trying to protect us at all. They're not trying to facilitate safer sex, support us in our sort of sexual discovery. So how aware even are they of what young people need?
You know, we've got austerity in the UK at the moment. For the last 5 years, public services like schools, libraries, hospitals, youth clubs, like, have had their funding cut. Parks, you know, like all of these public spaces that young people can go to and socialise and have a community and have something to do. And so, like, kids don't have any of those resources now. And maybe you're the only queer in your hometown, or maybe you're trans and you don't know any other trans people and you're getting bullied. Or maybe you have mental health issues, or you're autistic, or, you know, you have a disability. And the internet is literally the only place where you can talk to people like you. Maybe you're exploring your sexuality and you want to be able to read about, you know, being queer or being trans or whatever. I just think if the government really cared about young people, they would be funding those resources. They would be funding sex education. They'd be funding youth groups. They'd be funding libraries, rather than like axing all of those resources and then like taking away the only thing people have left, which is the internet. So I don't believe for a moment that this is about protecting children. I think
the internet is a massive threat to the power of the state because it provides, theoretically, pretty much all the information in the known world at one keystroke, and therefore the government would very much want to control that information. And again, there's a history of states and religions and groups trying to constrain sexuality because it's considered to be a dangerous force.
So, do we really need an internet firewall to protect the children? Interesting enough, there are proposals coming from people in the sex industry that sound way more reasonable than the government's plan. We talked to Pablo Döfner, who works at Last Productions, is the life partner of director Erika Lust, and a father.
Hello, my name is Pablo Döfner. I'm Erika Lust's partner and co-founder of her company around 10 years ago. We started a project last year called The Porn Conversation that is hosted in thepornconversation.org, and it's in several languages. And because we are because we are porn producers, and also parents of two girls that are right now 10 and 7 years old, we were questioned all the time, how are you going to tell your daughters what do you do, Pablo and Erika? This is going to be a nightmare, right? And we were answering to those other parents, hey, listen, we have to tell them about porn, but so do you. Because it's not that we have to have the conversation because we produce porn. You do not produce porn, but your kids have porn right across their device, one click away, the same as our girls. We also believe strongly that porn is there to stay, whether it's good porn or bad porn, ethical porn or mass-produced porn. Is there to stay. It's a phenomenon that we're not going to take away the same way that other things are prevailing in society. And we are strong believers that the way to deal with pornography, when young generations are growing, is with education. So maybe you're watching porn content when you are 16 years old and you're not liking something that you are seeing, and we have to tell them that as good it is to be liking what you're seeing, maybe you find some practices that you don't like, and that could be teaching you about your own sexuality. So basically, it's a constructive project that fights against this belief that things have to be banned in order to preserve order in society. Things, in order to preserve order and to make society a better place, are going to be changed with education, not with prohibition.
We need to start talking to our kids about sex and not letting the internet teach our children about sex.
You know, we actually would rather keep them in the dark to the point where their first experience of pornography is often the first time they're learning about sex, because the parents are so frightened to talk to their children about sex. They're so frightened of the children finding out, you know, and then going off the rails and going and, I don't know, like, banging their classmates at school in the stationery cupboard or something like that. It seems to be the fear that is that we're going to create a hypersexualized generation of children. But really, I feel that actually what we're doing is we're creating a repressed generation of children because we're not willing to talk to them honestly about what sex and desire is all about.
I would love to make under 18 porn, age-appropriate porn, because obviously every 15-year-old is different. But I think that, you can fuck legally at 16, and a lot of people are fucking sooner than that. And people are curious. They want to know, how do I make my partner feel good? What do I do? What do other people do? What's it all about? And especially if you're not getting sex education in school, of course you're going to go and look online. So I think that hiding those resources behind age checks isn't really going to serve anyone. They were I think if you're exactly if you're ready to look at porn, I was 13 when I started Googling, if you're curious, I think you should be allowed to look. It's only the only problem that I can see as a real problem is kids non-consensually being exposed to material in especially in a problematic power relationship, in an abusive way. So, absolutely I'm in favour of trying to create a social environment in which every person can have their sexual awakening, if they have one, at the time of their choosing, in the manner of their choosing, to be allowed to sort of start to explore that stuff when you're ready and how you want to. And I don't think that anybody should ever be forced into a sexual situation or forced to look at sexual materials before that they're ready, because that's child abuse, that's child sexual exploitation. But it's already a crime to show kids sexual images or force kids into a sexual situation. So why don't we create better structures to reduce sexual bullying and teach kids about consent and respect and boundaries? If we've got 10-year-old boys sending 10-year-old girls porn in order to bully them and slut shame them and make them feel uncomfortable, then that's bullying and that's harassment, and we need to be educating all of those kids about how to have healthy boundaries and what respect looks like. And that abstinence only education doesn't work, and it's not the answer.
So, after our investigation, we have a new manifesto to propose. A plan for a more diverse, inclusive, sex-positive world.
A better sex education and future for our children.
No borders, offline and online.
Make all of our wank data private again.
Keep governments and corporations out of sex workers' livelihoods.
Take back control of our sexualities.
Yes to face sitting.
Yes to female ejaculation.
Yes to period sex.
Yes to queer sex.
Yes to wild fucking.
Yes to BDSM.
Yes to fisting.
Yes to spanking.
Yes to doing whatever the fuck we want with our sex lives. Woo!
That was the Conservative Manifesto. Very dear thank you goes to everyone who participated, shared their knowledge and stories with us. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did, and take something with you on the way. If you like our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to. See you soon. The Earthdays Podcast.